for being here on the second day of the siege and battle of the Alamo. This morning we can hear the famous letter William Barrett Travis penned 186 years ago to call for aid. Before we hear those iconic words, let's talk a little bit about the man who penned them. William Barrett Travis was a young man, but he was a full-blown adult of his age. They didn't prolong adolescence back then like we do now. You had to grow up, and you had to grow up fast. By the time he reached the Alamo, he had already practiced law, taught school, started a newspaper, and faced combat. He had also already sired 2 children and had a marriage that had ended badly. He was smart, he was well-read, and he wrote well. And he liked a good practical joke. He was also raised in the atmosphere of liberty, just a generation or 2 removed from the writers and the warriors who had gained American independence. He had imbibed, drunk deeply, of the Southern sense of honor, the need to establish oneself in society and to establish a public reputation. That was the kind of man he was. Now, we all know his story. After some rocky episodes back east, Texas was to be his big do-over. The question became, what kind of Mexican, what kind of Texian, what kind of American would Travis be? His actions would determine that answer. The Alamo, as we know, became the pivot point of his life. Yet, those of us who are going through the journey of life understand that life often has 2 parts. His first part was typical of an ambitious young Southerner. The second part of his life was an apotheosis, an elevation above base human nature. His journey to this day began in a place called Anahuac. In 1831, he came to Texas as a 22-year-old battle-scarred veteran of life and love, but Anahuac was an important port in early Texas, and it seemed to be short of lawyers, and he intended to hang out a shingle there in that village. Once he had mastered basic Spanish, so he could practice law. That would be his pathway forward. In Anahuac, he revealed a complex personality. I mean, we all have interesting personalities. He's no different. He was a prankster, but often couldn't take a joke. He was brusque and dismissive at times, yet generous and civic-minded. He promoted education, took care of his friends when they got sick, and thought about his future. Shortly after arriving in Texas, Travis actually began keeping notes of his experiences, probably with an eye toward one day penning an autobiography that would cement his reputation for posterity. Mexico, though, was in turmoil, and instability in the national government left many newcomers to Texas adrift in their loyalties. The Federalist Constitution of 1824 seemed familiar to American settlers. Yet, the Centralists had little faith in the political ability of their fellow countrymen, and considered themselves incapable of democracy or self-rule. The Centralists had taken a bet against their fellow Mexicans. The Americans that moved to Mexican Texas believed that they had entered a land developing its own constitutional traditions, when in reality they moved to a country at war with itself. It was this atmosphere that exposed Travis to two influential factors. One, he started running with a bunch of troublemakers who cared little for following the rules of living in Mexican Texas. Later on, they would be called the War Party. It's kind of an easy handle to remember them by. But Travis also ran full force into an American expatriate named Juan Davis Bradburn, a colonel in the Mexican army who had fought for Mexico, had helped it win its independence, and had been rewarded for his service by being posted in Texas. Bradburn, native of Kentucky, was determined to enforce Mexican law. And as the authority in Anahuac, he took a dim view of lawbreakers and troublemakers. Bradburn may have been born in Kentucky, but his wife, his life, and fortune had been made in Mexico. The locals found Bradburn obnoxious. Bradburn found the locals backwards, hard-headed, and sneaky. Travis, young, educated, and with what many might call a command presence, became a thorn in Bradburn's side. In 1832, Travis worked a law case and got crosswise with Bradburn, who responded by throwing Travis in jail. Eventually, Travis worked this incident to his advantage, as he and his supporters made a sincere show of supporting the Mexican Federalist faction in opposition to Bradburn's bosses, the Centralists. This incident in Anahuac led to dust-ups at Nacogdoches and in Velasco, all demonstrating that American settlers had an opinion regarding Mexican national politics. The winner in this great national struggle in 1832 between the Federalists and the Centralists was a Federalist leader named Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna. Colonel Bradburn and his kind left Texas. Travis left Anahuac after that, but he left as a local hero, and he rode this fame to the emerging capital of the American settlements in Texas, San Felipe de Austin. Here he made a new life. He began the next stage of his development. He was on the make. He found a new love, Rebecca Cummins, and his law practice flourished. In fact, one of the cases he took on at San Felipe was he defended a free person of color against attempts to have her re-enslaved. But then things changed. Santa Anna, the Federalist hero, changed sides. And the most important man in Texas, Stephen F. Austin, languished in a Mexican jail. In June of 1835, Travis, with the burden of fame upon him and with momentum in his favor, led an expedition back to Anahuac to drive away a new Centralist garrison. Once again, he emerged a hero and a man of action. But he also emerged a wanted man. To the new regime in Mexico, Travis became one of the leading symbols of all that was wrong with Texas and with the American colonists in general. Austin also was changed in his reputation. He came back from prison in Mexico, a broken and a different sort of fellow. Then, of course, a dust-up in Gonzales on April 2nd, 1835. That's the come and take it event. Meant Travis would once again find a role that would suit his lifestyle, his temperament, and his growing fame. Now, there is a big, big difference between being an armed protester and being a military leader, and Travis had to grow into that new role. Travis had been locally famous, but he found the field crowded with other men of similar trajectory. He was no longer a lone star, but had joined a constellation of rising stars. As the campaign against the Centralists progressed, he earned Austin's trust, but when his patron left the Army for a different role in the growing insurrection, Travis returned to San Felipe, where he wanted to shuffle the deck a bit. See, the Texian rebellion still needed Travis, and in many ways, Travis needed to play a significant part in the action. He returned to San Antonio de Bear with a company of cavalry to serve as the eyes and ears of the revolution on its furthest frontier. Here, once again, he discovered the difference between the lure of fame and the price it would require. Fate would leave him the last man standing to command the small contingent of Texians in San Antonio that winter. When Santa Anna arrived, Travis reached his point of decision. He had the entire weight of the Texian cause on his shoulders, and he had to decide what kind of man he would be. Would he buckle from the pressure? Could these people with him really rely on him? Could he rely on these people? Could he rely on the idea, the dream of Texas? Would he be sustained? What could he do? What must he do? He answered that challenge bravely. He wasn't sure what others might do. Would they come to his aid? He had no idea. But he knew what his upbringing, his experience, and his own perceptions of himself required. Even if everyone around him lost their nerve, he would not, he could not lose his. He was an observer of human destiny and jealous of his own reputation. There could only be one answer: victory or death. I want to share with you a poem about courage, written by the English-born American poet Edgar Allan Albert Guest. Courage isn't a brilliant dash, a daring deed in a moment's flash. It isn't an instantaneous thing, born of despair with a sudden spring. It isn't a creature of flickered hope or the final tug at a slipping rope, but it's something deep in the soul of man that is working always to serve some plan. Courage isn't the last resort in the work of life or the game of sport. It isn't a thing that a man can call at some future time when he's apt to fall. If he hasn't it now, he will have it not when the strain is great and the pace is hot. For who would strive for a distant goal must always have courage within his soul. Courage isn't a dazzling light that flashes and passes away from sight. It's a slow, unwavering, ingrained trait with the patience to work and the strength to wait. It's part of a man when his skies are blue. It's part of him when he has work to do. The brave man never is freed of it. He has it when there is no need of it. Courage was never designed for show. It isn't a thing that can come and go. It's written in victory and defeat, in every trial a man may meet. It's part of his hours, his days and his years, back of his smiles and behind his tears. Courage is more than a daring deed. It's the breath of life and the strong man's creed. Now, we will hear from that courageous man, William Barrett Travis, in his own famous words.
Commandant of the Alamo, Bihar, February 24th, 1836. To the people of Texas and all the Americans of the world, fellow citizens and compatriots, I am besieged by 1,000 or more of the Mexicans under Santa Anna. I have sustained a continual bombardment of cannonade for 24 hours and have not lost a man. The enemy has demanded to surrender at discretion, otherwise the garrison would be put to the sword. If the fort is taken, I have answered the demand with a cannon shot, and our flag still waves proudly from the walls. I shall never surrender or retreat. Then I call on you in the name of liberty and patriotism and everything dear to the American character to come to our aid with all dispatch. The enemy is receiving reinforcements daily, and it will no doubt increase to 3,000 or 4,000 in 4 or 5 days. If this call is neglected, I am determined to sustain myself as long as possible and die like a soldier who never forgets what is due to his honor and that of his country. Victory or death. William Barrett Travis, Lieutenant Colonel Commanding.
This call for help goes out. We know the outcome, but today we hope alongside the garrison members. Thank you for joining us today. We will continue to commemorate the events of each day leading up to March 6th, so make sure to return to the site for our other anniversary events. Thank you, and remember the Alamo.